Now for our feature story of the day, breaking news, IMF deal to ban public sector Bitcoin accumulation in El Salvador. That's right, as the headline reads here, and we're going to dive deep into this. But first, I want to read you some insights from some influencers, and we'll dive back into the article. Samson Mao tweeted, "Now we know what confine means. No more Bitcoin buys for El Salvador. I would have preferred to hear it from the Bukele administration rather than the IMF." And yesterday I covered a very long thread from Samson Mao regarding El Salvador and Bitcoin, and it was our featured story, maybe 8 minutes of content. If you missed it, I encourage you to check that out. I'm not going to rehash everything I shared yesterday, but just the updates of what he shared here. So yeah, this is coming from the government of El Salvador. Bitcoins by the public sector. Bitcoin by the public sector are Bitcoins in all hot and cold wallets owned by or under the control of the public sector, including Shivo, which is their, wallet, and all other public sector entities and legal persons controlled by the state. And then voluntary accumulation of Bitcoins include purchase and mining of Bitcoins, excludes the accumulation of Bitcoins resulting from forfeiture, seizure, apprehension, custody, or other forms of property or possession by the government arising from law enforcement measures adopted in accordance with the Salvadoran law. And for those that don't know, more recently, Bukele took a $1.4 billion loan from the IMF, and there were some factors which were not disclosed and we didn't know about until now, in which we're discussing. Another person here, Joe Nakamoto, tweeted, "Begs the question, has El Salvador been buying Bitcoin or simply moving wallets from hot wallets to the publicly doxed cold wallets, as they have been making announcements of purchasing more and more Bitcoin? In fact, there were 2 purchases this week, which I'm aware of, and because I share, a lot of Bukele's posts. Nico from Simply Bitcoin tweeted, 94 countries have loans with the IMF. All of those countries were just sent a message that they can't buy Bitcoin. So I guess that's the downside of taking the money. This is why after 2021, no other countries followed El Salvador. Something stopped the momentum. We now have a pretty good idea who was behind that." And so there you have it, But dive in deeper into the story produced by Cointelegraph. And then when I'm done, I'm going to read you some insights I got from reaching out to some people in El Salvador, trying to get the inside scoop of what's really going on. But let me read this to you first. The IMF is looking to restrict Bitcoin purchases by El Salvador as part of an extended $1.4 billion funding agreement with the country. March 3rd, the IMF issued new requests for an extended arrangement under its fund facility to El Salvador, filing several new documents, including a staff statement update and a statement by its executive director for El Salvador. The technical memorandum of understanding indicated a condition of no voluntary accumulation of Bitcoin by the public sector in El Salvador. I repeat, no voluntary accumulation of Bitcoin by the public sector in El Salvador. Additionally, the memorandum requested the restriction of public sector issuance of any type of debt or tokenized instrument that is intended to be denominated in Bitcoin and implies a liability to the public sector. Meanwhile, IMF's Mendez Bertolo says Bitcoin-related risks are being mitigated. In an accompanying statement, February 26, Mendez, the fund's executive director for El Salvador, emphasized the IMF's extended fund facility for El Salvador aims to provide improvements in governance, transparency, and resilience to boost confidence in the country's growth potential. Meanwhile, Bitcoin-related risks are being mitigated, adding the following. The authorities enacted amendments to the Bitcoin law to clarify the legal nature of Bitcoin and remove from the law the essential features of legal tender. Acceptance of Bitcoin will be voluntary. It's always been voluntary from my understanding. Tax payments will be made in US dollars. Everyone has been paying in US dollars anyways. No one in their right mind is using Bitcoin to pay their taxes. And the role of the public sector and the Bitcoin project will be confined. He also mentioned the IMF program is expected to attract substantial additional financial support from the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and other regional development banks. The IMF's latest loan conditions reinforce prior commitments from the Salvadoran government to limit its engagement in Bitcoin-related economic activity. The statement said that the deal aims to address the potential risks of El Salvador's Bitcoin project in line with the fund policies and would fund advice to the authorities. It added, going forward, program commitments will confine government engagement in Bitcoin-related economic activities as well as government transactions and the purchases of Bitcoin. The IMF said that El Salvador will enhance regulation and supervision of digital assets in line with evolving international best practices. This marks another step in the IMF's ongoing effort to curb El Salvador's Bitcoin adoption. The country initially secured the $1.4 billion funding deal back in December of 2024 in exchange for scaling back its Bitcoin-related initiatives. And in mid-February, Samson Mao, Jan3 CEO and advocate for nation-state Bitcoin adoption, highlighted the IMF's vague language on whether it would allow El Salvador to continue to accumulate the BITI. And as you can see, the Bitcoin office, they posted this the other day, in which I know I reposted. They now have 6,100 Bitcoin as their reserve. But despite the IMF's stance, Bukele has continued acquiring Bitcoin. So I got to give Bukele credit there. March 3rd, Bukele announced a new purchase, bringing the country's total holdings to 6,100 BTC. And of course, I'm going to give you some insights that I gathered as well when I reached out to some folk. And amen, FDIMF. El Salvador should take their $1 billion loan and invest $2 billion into Bitcoin. Fine. Exactly, brother. IMF is effing criminals. Couldn't agree more. Here's some insights I got. So when I brought this up to some insiders over there in El Salvador, here's what they told me. Mining may not be the government's responsibility anymore, but you can give it to a third party to do it for you, which hints there is a loophole to continue to accumulate Bitcoin and still be, I guess, following whatever conditions from the IMF. So that's what I was told, just FYI. Now, who owns the IMF? According to Grok, the AI, the International Monetary Fund is owned by its 190 member countries. It's a cooperative organization not owned by any single entity or individual. Each country contributes financial resources known as quotas based on its economic size and influence, which also determines its voting power. The U.S. holds the largest share with about 16.5% of the voting rights, followed by other major economies such as Japan, China, and European nations. The IMF's governance is overseen by a board of governors, where each member country appoints a representative, typically a finance minister or central bank governor. Day-to-day operations are managed by the executive board with 24 directors, representing either individual countries or group of countries. So in short, it's a collective ownership structure, not a private or corporate one. That's according to the AI. I mean, whether I believe that or not, I mean, I don't know. But interesting. Let me know your guys' thoughts. How do you think this is being played out? Do you think Bukele will continue what he has been doing, doubling down on his Bitcoin purchases? Or do you think this changes things and that he'll stop? Do you think this will reverse what has been created in Bitcoin country? Or do you just think it's, I mean, just the IMF being the IMF, trying to put their hands in the pot here and have some form of control over El Salvador? I mean, I'm sure many of you guys have read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and this is what the IMF is notorious for. They give big loans to countries. The countries are kind of forced to accept them in some way, shape, or form, and then the country can't pay back the IMF, and then the IMF has control over policy in your country. This is why, ideally, I prefer to see the IMF out of their business. But I mean, obviously, I'm not a president. I don't know what kind of political pressure this man's dealing with. And I don't know. So you guys let me know your thoughts behind this, and I'll read your comments out loud. Welcome, everyone, to the Q&A segment of the live stream.